Hey, it's good morning to you, Daniel Ranta, in US. Which part of US are you in?
Well, actually, I'm in Guatemala, just outside of Guatemala City at 14 degrees north latitude here. And Dr. M, it's an honor to be with you today. Thanks for including me in your scholarly presentations.
Oh, we have been passing by each other, and at last we did meet. And there's a certain standard work I have to do. I have to
Mhm.
introduce. I have to introduce you to yourself, right? Let me do
Yeah,
that. It's an honor to be with you, and let me
thank
introduce
you.
you. And invariably, I get the. Am I visible to you?
Yes, you are.
There we go. You're on Dr. M's Vodcast. Yeah, it is video plus podcast. I made it into a Vodcast, and I'm
Mhm.
running this series of supporting and sustaining continuous improvement processes because it's very easy to implement, and later on you find that it gets flatlined and stagnate, and very often it dips down. So I have you there, and yeah, I put these gears over there because you're an expert in knowledge management, and I read somewhere that knowledge is information in action. So I said, if knowledge is information in action, let me put the gears over there in both our heads so that uh, we keep moving around. Because I read something else, which said that knowledge does not flow by itself. You have to make it flow. So I'm sure you're going to digress on that and make me understand a little more. I don't know much about it. So there you go. 25 plus years in consultancy, and especially your specialization in knowledge management. You are globally recognized for the work that you did with General Electricals in designing and implementing knowledge management. Is supposed to be, it is one of the best across the industry. Congratulations for that. And GE
Thank you.
seems to be lucky that they got you, and they did sustain it. And today, what we would like, we can talk about, because that's the way you wanted, that information flows between us to generate knowledge. So, transforming an organization with effective collaboration. So, we're going to talk about that. And before we talk about it, here we go. You want to know where I am? So, here we go. Can you see?
Hmm. Yes, I can.
So, you're in Bombay,
Hmm.
and we are into connecting continuous improvement professionals across the world. That's the mission that I have. So I'm going to stop sharing and start talking to you. We talked about collaboration and transforming an organization, and we use this word transformation pretty frequently. Uh, so my question to you is, transforming would mean what? What does transformation imply?
Well, Dr. M, I'd like to reiterate that it's an honor to be with you today. And when I think about transforming, I blend it actually with the word collaboration because so much of it is behavioral. So within an organization, regardless of the size, it's the decisions that people make that become a reflection and a manifestation of the behavior. And I often talk about this space in terms of leadership and people as well. So leadership, people, and behavior, that combination is really required to be able to be able to make something change radically. I mean, a lot of times it requires a radical change and maybe not 180 degrees of change, but looking at the bright spots. And organizations always have places where there are energy givers with can-do attitudes that are making a difference in terms of how they collaborate, how they behave, how they help others, how they reach out. And I love your graphic that you talked about earlier with the gears in the head, because with any organization, broadly speaking, the types of knowledge, explicit stuff that's written down, all well and good. Hopefully that can be found and reused. Hopefully it's good materials for within an organization, but it's the tacit knowledge, the other type that is inside of our heads, that is reflective of how work is more many times of an art than a science. When it's a science, it can be based on explicit knowledge, things that are written down, normative documents, maybe policies, procedures, recommended practices, etc. But it's that exchange of tacit knowledge, kind of on the gemba, on that shop floor where work is done, that you want to make sure that you kind of build a process where appropriate to be able to capture that exchange of knowledge when maybe you and I are working together and we're solving a problem. We're doing so in the context of a large organization, and we're in that process creating some best practices. And should we take the next step to be able to document that knowledge and maybe make it or more available for other people, so that when others face a challenge that's similar or perhaps even the same, then can they find that knowledge and reuse it? So that's kind of my opening comment. I liked how you introduced the subject. And yeah, a lot of times it's about transforming and kind of flipping that mindset to get more people to help each other solve problems, etc.
When you're
Does that make
talking,
sense?
yeah, it does make sense. And this tacit knowledge that the individuals, the employees possess is based on their experience and what they have been doing across their work, the work area that they have been using it for years. And that very often, to the best of my knowledge, you are the best judge, is not even known to them unless somebody asks them or somebody probes to them by saying, and that is where the question of why comes in, and or you start probing into that, and then he probably recognizes that he has some information with him, which he is willing to solve, and that's why I read that information. The minute you start putting into action, it just converts itself into knowledge. Is that the right interpretation of tacit knowledge?
I think it is. And, I think of it as a bit of a loop and how you can close the circle as people are working together. And I'm going to highlight again the kind of the human factors that come into play, because a lot of times in a global organization, I've seen this happen where people don't even realize that wherever they may be in the world, you were just showing us the world map and spinning around and showing where you were located on the west coast of India. But it can be anywhere in the world where I'm sitting on something I've developed or we've developed as a team, a best practice that others in the world could know about. And if you relegate yourself to serendipity or a knowledge accident, is that going to happen? In the world we live in today, I know, thankfully, largely out of the pandemic, et cetera, there just seems to be, less people traveling. And so a knowledge accident where I happen to run into you, and you and I start talking about a subject and we discover that, wow, you've got a best practice and, I need that best practice, is not very likely to happen. So it requires people's willingness to demonstrate the human vulnerability and ask questions. Asking a question can be difficult. In a large global organization, a lot of boundaries, right? English is a second, third, fourth, or maybe even fifth language. The time zones, the cultural differences, et cetera. So people have to be willing to kind of stick themselves out there a lot of times and ask a question. And then with that collective elaboration that can happen, as long as it's enabled with processes to enable that consistently in organization, the knowledge will find its way to the right group of people. This is how I approach this subject with large organizations when I'm consulting for them, so that we can get the best minds to kind of not necessarily, solve it, because maybe it's something that's very difficult, but close to being able to create, the best solution at the time. And then you have something where you can make that decision, and that loop that I talk about is, once things get close to solved, you can make a decision, hopefully in the flow of how people work. And again, that's part of how knowledge is flowing around. And I refer to that as processes can be enabled by technology for sure. That can be documented. So other people can find and reuse that knowledge that is meritorious to be documented, it's deserving to be documented. So that's that kind of loop, and that's continuous improvement to a great extent. It's an aspect of continuous improvement, and it flows out of people's heads. How do you make that happen? That's why I started with the right leadership mindset, how it's about people, and then it's about behavior.
Yeah, I like what you said, because yesterday at 6:05 India time, we created history by our moon, our
Sure.
spacecraft Chandrayaan landing on the south of the moon. We are among the first on the south of the moon, but the fourth. And then when you're talking about collaboration, that could not have happened without the collaboration across. There are thousands of people working on the ground in India, especially the NASA was collaborating, ESA was collaborating. There was total collaboration, and the data were shared, online data were shared, and this was all due to people-to-people collaboration. That this, which we credit ourselves by being the first to land on the south, but as you said, would not have taken place without the real-time data being beamed across to the scientists in India and elsewhere in the world. I don't see a better example of collaboration than what happened yesterday.
And congratulations on the way I've been for the story. And the other part of that, to give you more context, was, look at the Russians. They've been, in a raid of the U.S. starting back in the 1960s, et cetera. And just days before, they tried to land in the same vicinity on the moon, and you saw a tragic end to that their capsule that was going into the moon actually crashed. And then the other thing that impressed me about India's achievement was the cost-effective nature of doing it. So it's not something to be taken for granted, and it required, like you said, a lot of collaboration from a lot of different sources, people that may never even have met face to face, that were going back and forth. And the currency they were using to go back and forth is a word we haven't mentioned yet that's so important in the context of what we're talking about, and that's trust. And creating that trust to go back and forth with valuable insights and wisdom to be able to help India's efforts to land on the south side of the moon. It's just a beautiful thing. Congratulations again.
Yeah, and that too coming after a failure. That was 4 years ago, a failure, and then to
Sure.
the resilience to get back. And this again wouldn't have happened if it was not for all the collaboration, the data that was collected, why the failure took place, etc., etc. So coming back, that was some sort of a transformation that happened in our space journey. So an organization, we just saw a demonstration of how effective collaboration can be across the world. As you said, many of them would not even see their face-to-face, but the real-time data being so there is a process involved, and there is information being shared and knowledge being shared inwards and outwards, because this would become a source of sharing for other parts of the world.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention, since we're talking about the topic, how strong NASA has been in knowledge management and collaboration over the last few decades, and how they've come across they've got 9 or 10 centers physically located in different areas of the United States that makes up the whole kind of NASA ecosystem. And they've been very, very strong. And they've recognized the importance of collaborating and knowledge management for, as I said, several decades. So it's something that is essential in that that type of work. Work is not always just it's not based on, like I said earlier, that balance between, I think of a continuum between science and work being an art. And it's not always just so well known that it's a science. And a lot of times it's where you have to get that effective behavioral collaboration happening, where work is more of an art to get the best ideas from people. And like I referred to, collective elaboration of ideas and put that into play.
So let's come back to Earth from space. How does an organization really feel that they require collaboration amongst the people within an organization? Where do they feel the need to tap on the tacit knowledge of people? How is the need felt by the leaders? Or
well, I think that's an excellent question, and I have tended to work in areas where they were engineering based organizations. So in oil and gas, and you mentioned General Electric, and helping other companies as well as a consultant, large auto manufacturing companies, et cetera. So real engineering base. And the way that I like to do it is, the knowledge management is how you can measure this. How can you measure the difference that is taking place and your efforts in creating a collaborative culture and transforming a culture through the behaviors that we've already talked about? And what I've learned based on my interactions with engineers and leadership in different organizations, it's been a real blessing that I've been able to just listen and learn from people that had way more knowledge than I had in specific areas of engineering, where you could do root cause analysis or fishbone analysis on where problems are occurring the most. And that's where I've learned that you kind of want to focus your attention on what I call purposeful collaboration that's going to make a difference for the organization, kind of where it hurts the most. So when you're able to unlock those opportunities, because you can collaborate all over, and like I mentioned, you can have knowledge accidents that happen, and it's a beautiful thing, and that's all well and good, and more of those will happen as you develop, in my opinion, purposeful collaboration. But I've tended to focus on where you can get a measurable impact based on how people are sharing knowledge, and for that you've got to be able to get in, look through the weeds, do things like the fishbone analysis to be able to do the root cause and figure out where it hurts the most, to determine what knowledge don't we know enough about that we should, and this is where we continue to have some setbacks or maybe even failures. That you mentioned one with the Indian space program, tragically 4 years ago, et cetera. So the point is that I believe there's always that opportunity, and that's where you can make a huge difference and really start to transform an organization when you can show measurable results based on the behavior that's happening around how people are collaborating together and solving those problems, and doing that full cycle of knowledge, turning the tacit into things that are explicit. We don't want all knowledge that's tacit in our heads to be turned into explicit. Nobody has the time. Nobody has the desire to do that. But when you pique somebody's interest in terms of problem solving with effective root cause analysis, then you can get after the things that make the biggest difference. And that's where the term purposeful collaboration comes into play. Did that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Purposeful collaboration, I mean, what I hear you saying is that which adds value to the organization in terms of growth, profit, or whatever is their vision. Would that be appropriate to say that would be the purposeful nature of the collaboration?
Absolutely. I just finished a year-long engagement with one of the world's largest semiconductor companies. They make equipment that makes chips or semiconductors in the world today, and their focus was on what we just talked about, so on client satisfaction. So to be able to show the clients, because they're working in the fabs or fabrication centers around the world, and providing that equipment and monitoring and managing the equipment to make the chips or semiconductors, there's a constant need to be able to demonstrate the success and the uptime of this equipment, et cetera, and to solve those problems in the hardware and software area of that very, very complicated area. A lot of it is science, but there's a lot that's problem solving and things that come into play in terms of interoperability and different configurations, et cetera. And it was just a delightful organization with fabulous leadership to work with. They were really good at collaborating, but they weren't doing the full cycle. And when you're not doing the full cycle, a lot of times you're rediscovering the same issues and the same problems, et cetera. People are asking the same questions that they asked 4 or 5 or 8 months ago. You can imagine that can pull a lot of energy out of an organization, and that tacit knowledge wasn't fully developed, and the same question keeps coming up time and time again and keeps being solved, et cetera. Thankfully, with this organization really specialize in having, like I referred to earlier, energy givers with can-do attitudes that were willing to continually answer the same question. But in a more optimal scenario, you can imagine where that knowledge is being developed, it's being discovered, it's being solved together, and it's being documented as appropriate so that people can find and rediscover it. And that's what we worked on with them, to close that cycle and to flesh out that expertise and those experts that really contributed, so that we could effectively reward and recognize those individuals for the work they were doing in the development of tacit knowledge. Continuous improvement, that's what it's all about. So we made it happen mainly with people that were never going to meet each other face to face across a number of different languages. And so a complicated scenario for sure.
Yeah, this what occurs to me is this tapping into the tacit knowledge and completing the circle, as you say, cannot happen randomly. It has to be a process involved, a systematic approach involved to get into to get or extract the tacit knowledge and complete the cycle. So could you define that for me, as to that you require some sort of a systematic standardized way or non-standardized way, or it can be flexible or standard to extract this knowledge and complete the cycle? And I would like to know what the cycle means. Is it the same of PDCA cycle, or when you mean a cycle, can you elaborate on that?
Definitely. And I want to introduce another topic as I talk about this that's extremely important in the creation of what I call a learning organization. So specifically in of this client that I'm referring to, where I was consulting for them, is that what we did was we defined within their communities that were longstanding communities, of which gave us a lot of data, who were brokers, those people around the world who were helping each other, more willing to not only ask questions, but even more importantly, answer questions. So we were able to take the data and do organizational network analysis to determine where those people were located that were helping the most in different areas of the world. And in the context of these business-focused, problem-solving communities that they had created, what we were able to do is they previously only had one leader. And I said, no, let's disperse the responsibility geographically to be able to pull out the knowledge from from locations around the world. The most knowledge is local. I mentioned it earlier in the context of I might be sitting on a best practice wherever I might be in the world, and I don't even realize it. So you want to enable the leadership and thank the leadership, and to ask people from a behavioral standpoint that are already doing these things. They're already those energy givers with can-do attitudes that are helping around the world leaders. And we recognize those people. We're able to find them with the organizational networks that we did to show who those brokers were. And we got them involved as core team members. And shared the responsibilities, the 4 or 5 things we wanted them to do, which, oh, by the way, they were already doing because we were able to pull out those collaborative patterns. They were already working that way. For them, it was kind of intuitive to work that way. And then building on that, each community, what we did was we put a taxonomy in place. And a taxonomy is a set of topics and subtopics in the case of these communities, which are really reflective of people's capabilities and competencies, what they know about. And so we got people to nominate their own areas of expertise in the context of this 2-layer taxonomy, as each community was launching and transforming itself. Okay. And so the way that the processes worked when somebody asked a question around the world is that I tagged that question with the right topics and subtopics, and that instantaneously, immediately went to the people who had matching areas of expertise. They already, from a capability competency standpoint, they were quite familiar with those particular subjects. And each community, by the way, had between 150 and 250 nodes of topics and subtopics. So, which is reflective of the scope and the areas where that community was solving problems and going back and forth, et cetera. So we started to match up people to get away from that information overload, so that we gave ourselves the best chance as we moved the knowledge. We said, hey, Dr. M, I see you have expertise in this area. You got an immediate alert, whether it's on your phone or on your laptop, and said, can you please help out this individual in this location who has a question about something you already know about? So what we're doing is we're inviting the best people to the party in terms of their knowledge and expertise and whether they were viable experts, et cetera. And we're getting the problem solved quicker, avoiding information overload where irrelevant spam type of information was going to, people, hundreds of people in a community. You don't want to deliver that because, people have a negative reaction. We're all very busy. And what my boss finds interesting, I need to find fascinating. So I need to focus on my work priorities. But what we find is that from a behavioral standpoint, this is very, very interesting, is that where I define my own expertise, what I'm saying is essentially is that I'm willing to help other people in these areas. And so when I get something, I didn't find it off-putting at all, that relate how I can help. And, oh yeah, I have done that before. I have experience in that area. I'm willing to, send you a quick message, whether again, it's on my phone or on my laptop, and say, hey, watch out for this, watch out for that. Here's something you may want to consider. We faced that same challenge before, and this is how you can solve it. So, and then as we went through that in the processes of the flows of knowledge, with using the technology that we put in place, that was superior to what they had previously, what they were able to do also was make decisions on when something got resolved. And so a question that was resolved effectively then becomes a candidate in this cycle that we're talking about for the tacit knowledge exchange to be documented. Okay. Ultimately, you want to be able to do that. So you're creating for each of these business focused communities kind of a bullpen of really solid seminal knowledge that has been documented, et cetera. So you get to a point where when you're typing in a question, this is all possible today. It's 2023, right? A question, potential answers to that question based on what it is that you're typing. We kind of experience this in Google, right? And we experience surely in, generative AI technology these days with things like ChatGPT, where there's potential answers that are popping up for you prior to even asking a question of people around the world. It's fine to do that, but it's also a beautiful thing if it's already been documented, that tacit knowledge. And as I'm typing, then it already comes up and says, oh, that's really cool. Or contextually, I see also who the people with expertise in that area are. Oh, I didn't know that Dr. M, he's right down the hall from me. And you have the knowledge in this area. And then I can just, get up off my desk and walk over and say, hey, I got something. I saw that I didn't realize you were an expert in this area. Could you potentially help me? So I'm trying to paint a picture of what we did for this organization to be able to really transform how they were working. And again, it comes back to the tacit knowledge and being able to document and make it, those areas where it makes the most sense, make it explicitly available to people to really change how people work, all in support of, yeah, problem solving, but their customers and their customer satisfaction.
What I like what you said is the time saved for non-inventing the wheel, because somebody has already done it. So why reinvent it? So that's the time saved. And then you are focusing on something much more, that could add more value than spending time on what has already been done. I like that, what you said. And this is
Oh, yeah.
people to people. There is a content involved and there is a technology involved. That today, we are very lucky to have that sort of, that you tap and you get all this information, and that stops you. That really stops you from not doing what is already done. And I see it in many organizations that the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing.
That's exactly right. Sometimes when I want to get people's attention, I'll use the analogy. We've all seen a dog chasing his or her own tail, right? And that reinventing the wheel is kind of like that nonsensical circle that the dog may be making. And so we want to move away from that. And the other thing that I said, I opened up another topic here, is that with generative AI technology is, the thing people get excited about that. And listen, it's a content game. Where's the content? Where's the people that are looking for context to solve problems? They're solving the problems, and that becomes a corpus internally within an organization that you can unleash the hounds on in terms of, generative AI technology. So my point here is you want to have the content all organized as well as possible. And the content a lot of times is that the richness of the tacit knowledge that is built upon within an organization that you can tap into from an AI perspective. And so that's this process is kind of an upfront process that needs to be put into place for an organization to be able to build the richness of what exists in terms of a corpus of knowledge you want to tap into. Does that make sense? I think it does. I mean, I love that point.
It makes a lot of sense to me because the way I look at it is the data by itself doesn't mean anything unless there's a context. If there's a context in the data, that converts itself into information. And that information, when it's put into use, we call it knowledge, the way you have defined it. And maybe knowledge at some point of time become wisdom. But without the context, the data is useless. And with that context, the information get generated, and then sharing and putting that into action becomes knowledge. The best I could decipher from what you said.
I did a presentation recently where I'm an adjunct professor. I teach 2 courses in the area of knowledge management in the graduate program at Kent State University. It's one of 3 graduate knowledge management programs in the U.S. Really, really good program. I teach 2 courses there, and I just was at Kent State and between Akron and Cleveland area in Ohio in the U.S. in a few months back. And the title that I used for my presentation was Chasing Context. And everyone kind of looked at it and said, chasing context, what are you talking about? I said, in the workplace. So what you and I have talked about here, the way I could summarize it is that workers are chasing context because they care about quality. I care about quality because it's how we work, and it's a mindset, and it flows down from leadership, et cetera. I mean, this is a best case scenario, in my opinion. And so how do I care about quality? Well, I'm not just going to, take what's just good enough or satisfice. Satisficing is when you literally means that, that's good, and you go ahead for that. In an engineering-based world or any other type of organization, I mean, satisficing is not going to cut it as far as I'm concerned in terms of quality.
Yeah, that's what we started using the term called currently adequate.
Good. Okay, it's currently adequate.
Currently adequate. That doesn't mean, and you can't be satisfied by saying it's currently adequate, because world takes over, technology takes over. So the thing that we started is that there has to be for this, as you said, there has to be some sort of a process involved for people to people. There's a content involved, there's technology involved. So there has to be a structure in place where somebody is responsible to get all these things at one place. I mean, somebody has to take up the leadership, leadership in the sense, onus, or was a term that you use, as somebody who takes up this job of collecting the knowledge, or maybe an office. I don't know how the structure is made for sharing all this knowledge. Is there a structure
Yeah.
involved? There has to be a structure involved, isn't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, a strategy, one of the courses I teach at Kent State is called Designing and Implementing Knowledge Management in the Workplace. So for any organization, the course focuses on how to create the strategy and what are the elements for a strategy. A lot of times I look at it as more of an ecosystem, because you're dealing with all types of knowledge. You're dealing with people, leadership, how you're going to measure it, the difference you're going to make, how you're going to chase that context, how you create a taxonomy that's reflective of capabilities and competencies, how you ultimately create a learning organization. That's what I was going to talk about before with the learning organization, because you can imagine that as this tacit knowledge is flowing, it just becomes a way in which people learn. 70, 80, 90% of all learning happens on the job, as we all know. So when you present the knowledge that's reflective of the best, you're able to do that. So creating that strategy becomes the responsibility. I like one of the areas I specialize in is helping organizations build a centralized organization with the roles and responsibilities, and how it is that they're going to implement really collaboration services, act as internal trusted advisors within an organization, to be able to do that work and empower others. And I like to help groups envision, although when you do knowledge management very, very well, I don't know if this ever really happens within organizations, but envision a point where people are so empowered to be able to operate in this new way that all of a sudden, the whole organization that we're talking about that initiated this and starting it can even go away, because it becomes part of the organizational and cultural DNA of any company or organization. But you definitely have to have the catalyst, which is an organization, somebody that knows about how you start a strategy in this area, knows about how to discover all the things that we've talked about so far, to build the processes to make and to build on bright spots. Because most organizations, when I go in, I love bright spots. Those are places where, written about in the book Switch, by the two brothers that one at Stanford and one at Duke. It's a really, really good book in the context of knowledge management. But the bright spots are things that you want to discover that the organization is already doing well. So in terms of change management, you don't want to tear everything down. You want to look for those bright spots and build on those and make them key cogs in how it is that you're building this knowledge management and transforming the collaborative processes within an organization. So you build on those, you put the strategy together, you get other people empowered, you make sure that leadership is on board and providing the sponsorship, et cetera, for kind of working in a new way. A lot of times organizations they get wrapped around the axle when it comes to digital transformation. People come in, consultants will come in and say, we're going to digitally transform your organization. I got news for you. Digital transformation is real, but it always starts, in my opinion, the most effective, the leadership, the people, and the behavioral aspects for digital transformation. You can't some organizations will think it's just technology based. We're going to bring in this, you mentioned data, we're going to have better ways to put the data all together, et cetera. And we're going to digitally transform just like that because some vendor said that our technology does it all for you.
Yeah,
I don't see that being effective.
Because you did say that initially that whatever data is there, you just capture the data which is adding value to your organization. You don't just capture any data as you require. And that's what you were talking about, the knowledge, tacit knowledge. There are a lot of tacit knowledge, but use the one that is value adding for a purpose is what emphasizes. So I'll take a minute of yours by saying that okay, which you did answer in a way, to my mind. So then, to the domain area which I come from, continuous improvement. Very often we have got an anchor, which is there's an office called the Kaizen office. There's a lean office, or there are people who's anchoring it. We don't have to have a separate knowledge management office as such. These people themselves, if they adopt the knowledge management, they can take it forward. Am I off the target, or
No way. You're spot on. And, those elements, they can become, adjunct or part of the same mentality about how knowledge is flowing around the organization. You want to be able to, document those things, and you want to, and at when I worked at GE, one of the places where we started out was in the aviation area, a big lean organization. The CEO, the King Times, still big lean proponent, Larry Culp. And so lean became, and what we did was we did our knowledge management approach, how we did knowledge sharing for GE as much as possible in the context of lean mentality, lean methodology, et cetera, because it makes so much sense to bring those concepts together within the organization. Otherwise, you'd be kind of fighting or competing. A lot of times in organizations, it's just crazy how much, bureaucratic nonsense goes on in terms of people fighting because their program may be better than others. What we did is we collapsed everything to the extent possible in terms of our knowledge management approach right into lean methodologies, which, because it made so much sense. It wasn't about competing with each other to see who get the best program. It was about creating the most shareholder value and leveraging the knowledge of the brilliant workforce that we had.
That's brilliant. That's brilliantly put. And I liked what you said. And talking about GE, I think this is the last question that I'll ask you because we are running out of time. Is the famous equation that we have is Q into A, that is, the effectiveness is Q into A, which Q can be any intervention, but the acceptance, how do you get the acceptance of the workforce involved? Of course, now we are linked it with lean, so we also have the same problem of acceptance. But
well, that's a really super cool question. Let me tell you why. Because you always worry about this because you come in and there's been other approaches that they've tried and other things that they had done. Well, at GE, what I found is that the focus had been on explicit knowledge. So think of a big PDF file where page 56 contained a little piece of information or knowledge that you needed at the time. What are your chances of actually running into that and finding that knowledge? It's sometimes I use the analogy to wake people up a little bit again, that it's like a big PDF is like something that's stuck at the bottom of a swimming pool. I mean, how many people are actually going to go down to the bottom of the swimming pool and look for that? And so what we tapped into was, I'm pointing to my heart because we had a workforce that really cared about helping other people and moving things forward in terms of quality of the work, et cetera. And so we tapped into the professional pride. And as we worked to pull out the tacit knowledge by creating community-based taxonomies that, again, were really reflective of people's capabilities and competencies, and the skills that they had and they brought and the skills that they wanted to learn about as well, then we were able to get the most interesting and the right parts of the workforce involved, move away from that information overload, the spam that came to people, which is really crazy, again, in terms of creating knowledge processes in 2023. It doesn't have to be that way. And so getting the right knowledge to the right people at the right time was a real part of our vision there. And so at tapping into professional pride and tacit knowledge and people with expertise, and they had this certain type of title that they used called a controlled title holder for people that with true expertise at 4 different levels. And we were able to bring those people in based on the taxonomy to be able to get those people to be focal points in solving the problems that related to the areas where they were truly experts and recognized as such in the engineering culture that GE had. And so once we got that in play, it was something that became something that they kind of embraced it. And the owners of each of the communities, they call community sponsors, and their relative, their leadership teams, their core team members, et cetera, embrace their taxonomy. And taxonomy is a living, breathing thing. This list, this set of topics and subtopics, capabilities and competencies. So they embrace that in terms of defining the scope of their communities and what they know about, what they need to know about, what people will ask about, what they need to solve problems about, et cetera. And they just kept building. It's like an English garden in a sense, where you're constantly changing out some of the flowers and extracting some of the weeds, et cetera. So when you have that kind of involvement, then all of a sudden the people are more interested, all the way up to the top, to leadership, all the way up and down the line, to overcome and to take a command and control culture and push it down, so that, you know, everybody, we're just looking for the right answer. We don't care where you might sit in the hierarchy. We're looking for the right knowledge flows to get involved in the process. So that's how we tapped into that. You know, make a long story short, professional pride, the fact that people care, and we got the right people into the equation.
I
make it work.
love what you said at the end. When you said professional pride, what occurred to me was the intrinsic need, the intrinsic motivation a human being have to do something. And that cannot be compensated by any eccentric, I always get tongue twisted with this word. With money or whatever is the material thing, that can't satisfy it.
Mhm.
It is the intrinsic
Exactly.
need that you are wanted, you are recognized. And that's what I like what you said. The pride of work. I think Deming did touch on that at some point of time, of recognizing the
Mhm.
pride of work. And it's tap into
Exactly.
that. And I love what you said. And I really wish we can go in a later sessions, we can deep dive into it. Incidentally, I have what we call the study circle. We got study circle in India where we got 10 participants. We are doing a study on the science of workforce engagement. That's a book written by Lani Wilson. And we go chapter by chapter. There are 11 chapters, so 1 hour per week. So we cover that. So I have the study circle in India, the first batch of 10, the second batch of 10, and there is one that I'm starting in Middle East. So we are talking about workforce engagement. And as they mature, they will come up, and then that group at some point of time, maybe next year or so, I would like you to address them, and we can run a session with them of a couple of weeks where you teach them, because they're at the level, at all levels, from all the fields. We got health sectors, we got engineers, we got CFOs, we got CEOs, but there's a study circle where we are learning things. And it is not a tutorial. It's that they read a chapter and then they come and we discuss and we exchange views. So that's what I have started. I mean, that satisfies my inner motivation of learning by getting people together. So thank you very
Let me
much.
just say that
And
I would love, let me just say about what you just talked about, and count me in, Dr. M. I would love to share and participate and learn as well from those individuals. So count me in. And I just wanted to thank you for your time today, and thank you for including me in your podcast process. I appreciate it.
thanks a lot. Thank you very much. And I'm going to stop recording.